Hi out there, and welcome back to our Land Bulletin series. I'm Haley Mirr, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Development here at Mirr Ranch Group. For those of you who are first joining, this is the Land Bulletin, where every other week we discuss the ranch and sporting property market, buying and selling advice, the latest best stewardship practices, as well as topics currently impacting landowners. Mirr Ranch Group is a full-service ranch real estate brokerage and consulting company focusing on legacy ranches and sporting and conservation properties around the West. While we have focused a lot of our hunting conversations on big game, we deal with a lot of properties across the West and buyers and sellers who are interested in purchasing upland bird and waterfowl hunting properties. Today, we will take a look at what makes a ranch a robust habitat for upland birds and waterfowl, and how landowners can ensure that their property can retain this habitat and ensure a sustained ecology for these types of birds. Helping me out today is Gabby Zaldumbide. Gabby is a small and big game guide for Uncharted Outdoorswomen, as well as the managing editor of the Project Upland magazine, a magazine that is dedicated to the culture of and information of small game and bird hunting and throughout the United States. So without further ado, welcome Gabby. Hi there, Gabby.
Hey, Haley.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Sometimes I get tongue twisters. I write these intros out myself and then I just go over the words. So thank you so much for your patience on that one. And welcome to the Land Bulletin.
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. So before we get started into kind of upland birds and what you're seeing out there right now and how ranch owners can kind of prepare their habitat for those type of species, I'd love to know your background and how you got involved in not only Uncharted Outdoorswomen, but outfitting in general.
Yeah. So I like to say that I grew up indoors. I was born in Maryland, but raised in Wisconsin. And my family didn't do any hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, rock climbing, pretty much like any outdoor activity that the average Coloradan kid is going to be doing outside. Instead, I just rode my bike around a lot. And that was kind of how I gained an initial interest in birds and birding. And that love for birds is what drove me to apply to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and major in wildlife ecology. So I was there. It's a pretty awesome program. It's adaptable in the sense that I could choose between, forest ecology, wildlife ecology, entomology, all that kind of good stuff. And so I pretty much just took all the ornithology classes that the department offered because I was such a bird nerd, and just absolutely loved it. I also took some field courses that introduced me to the West for the first time. I didn't cross to the western side of the Mississippi River until like 2015. So I was 18 or 19 years old. And this was all thanks to the Wild Rockies Field Institute. They offer college credit for like backcountry backpacking classes. And so I
Oh,
took
wow.
two with them, environmental ethics and restoration ecology. And both were like 3-week long backpacking adventures in like remote country in Montana. We went to the Bob Marshall Wilderness, Glacier National Park, Yellowstone National Park, the Swan Valley, and that was my first exposure to the Rocky Mountains, and like it just utterly blew my mind. I had no idea that landscapes could look like this. People could, actually be Western. Like it's not just a myth, it's actually real. And just, seeing elk for the first time, seeing mule deer for the first time, all of those kind of landmark things, planted the seed in my brain of like, wow, when this undergrad experience is over, I'm moving out west. Like I don't care how fast I need to run away from Wisconsin, but I'm going there. Which led me to 2018. So right before I graduated from UW-Madison, I took one of their classes that they offered called Conservation Leaders for Tomorrow. It was like a 5-week long course, a couple nights a week, pretty laid back, small group size that was geared towards educating future wildlife biologists about hunting and hunting culture. And so at the time I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. I didn't really know what other career in wildlife existed besides working for a state or federal agency. So I took that class because, like I said, I'd never had any exposure to hunting before. And so I
Yeah.
figured it would be a great way to learn about my future constituents that I would be serving, through some type of government position or something like that. But as part of that course, I got my hunter safety certification. So got that passed, signed up for a Learn to Hunt Turkey weekend event that was happening like literally the following weekend after I got my certification, and shot my first tom. It was just like a giant, healthy, mature Eastern turkey. And I was like, holy smokes, this is so cool. Like, not only did I, now I know where this food came from, but I'm holding a bird. Like, I am handling a dead bird right now. I get to keep all these feathers. I get to keep the spurs. I get to keep the tail fan. So many things clicked in my brain, and it was just such a beautiful intersection of my lifelong passion for birds and now, in turn, being able to hunt them in my free time and know where my food comes from and all that kind of good stuff. So after that, that seed for wanting to move out west was still there. And so I applied to Western Colorado University. They were offering a Master of Environmental Management program that specialized in public land management here in Gunnison, Colorado. And, got in 2018, graduated in 2020, and I'm still here. I love Gunnison. It's my home now. It's a really special place, and I intend on staying here for the foreseeable future. So that kind of brings me to where I am today, and met Aaron Kreider, owner, founder of Uncharted Outdoorswomen, through a mutual friend. He had recommended me, as someone who would be a good fit for her operation. Just like, telling her I am a huge wildlife nerd, and I am trustworthy, and I love to work, and I get stuff done. And I took her out. We actually met up for the first time on her birthday that year. We went ice fishing because it was, late January, and caught her birthday fish. It was her first fish through the ice. And she was like, hey, I think this Gabby chick's pretty cool. And so we've been talking every week ever since. Got hired later that same year, and have since done everything from like learn to hunt big game educational, like weekend long camps, to like short day trips for, walk wade fishing, rabbit hunting, that type of stuff. And yeah, this year is my first year guiding waterfowl. So I am super, super excited about that.
That's amazing. I love to hear your trajectory, and I love that you call yourself a bird nerd because one, I just love that phrase, but two, it's, we kind of talked about this a little bit before this, and we'll get into a little bit more, but it's so cool to see that, you cared so much about the habitat, and now you're seeing that not only can you can be a conservationist through protecting these habitats, but also through hunting and like figuring out how those two things kind of correspond with each other and how to bring more education about kind of these populations of birds. It's cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of the biggest reasons I was interested in continuing to hunt after that first turkey experience is after I learned where all the dollars you spend on hunting, go to, according or for like for state agencies and stuff. It just goes back into habitat creation and management and restoration, and just it made so much sense. Like, why would I not, spend a couple $100s a year on hunting licenses and fees? That just goes back towards procuring more of the land that sustains the animals I want to hunt. I think it's a beautiful little cycle.
It is. And it's great to have people like you on the show to kind of bring light to that. And I'm sure that's something you talk about too. What is this Project Upland magazine that you're the editor of? Is that, I'm sure those are some of the topics you guys cover in that magazine.
Oh, for sure. So Project Upland Magazine, we just launched our 5-year anniversary issue this past fall. So I've been working here for almost 2 years now. So I really enjoy it. And we have the print magazine and an online editorial that are both focused on just talking about upland bird culture, from, scientifically informed wild bird management to, really lovely hunting stories, to highlighting specific breeds of hunting dogs, pointing dogs or flushing dogs, and really everything in between. Wild game recipes come to mind, policy updates, all that kind of good stuff. I'm the one who's out there assigning those topics to people and writing a bunch of the stuff myself too. So
Awesome.
it's a wonderful job. Yeah.
And who are the people that kind of write with you? Is it people similar to your background, outfitters, those kinds of things, or a
Yeah.
smorgasbord?
So it's really a smorgasbord, but I'm also somewhat of an anomaly in the sense that I went on my first upland bird hunt this year. Like, I had previously hunted, being in Colorado, you can shoot dusky grouse with a 22 rifle. And so that was kind of my upland bird hunting experience. And my superiors over at Project Upland, AJ DeRosa and Jennifer Wapensky, have been bird hunting for much longer than me and are fully entrenched in bird hunting culture. And they're like, Gabby, that's not bird hunting. Like you're shooting birds, but that is not upland hunting necessarily. And I'm like, I know, I want to really spend a lot of time going out there and learning what this whole deal is about because I just love birds so much. I want to experience more time in the field, looking, watching, shooting at birds, usually missing, you know. But yeah, it's really cool to learn about the nuances of upland culture through both AJ and Jennifer's eyes. AJ's been a bird hunter his entire life. He grew up in New Hampshire and still lives there. So ruffed grouse and American woodcock are like his number one and two things that he does each fall. And that it's just so completely different to everything I've been used to. I don't have a hunting dog. I got my first shotgun last year. Like it's super new to me still, but I definitely have a very deep appreciation for it.
Yeah, and I think you're coming from an appreciation of the bird before the sport, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so you talked about you love Gunnison. You're in that basin over there, and I know two of our brokers especially love hunting. One of them's a huge hunter and just did a single elk hunt by himself on his ranch out there. But how has the current season been for upland bird and waterfowl hunting on the western slope? I know there's a
Yeah.
couple different kind of seasons happening right now, so I'd love to know kind of what's going on over there.
Yeah, totally. So we can start on upland birds first, just to answer those questions so we don't get too many
Yeah,
waterfowl versus upland thing
yeah.
confusion happening. But Colorado, I actually firmly believe is a sleeper state for upland bird hunting. We offer, I think it's something like 12 different species of upland birds that you can hunt according to CPW's small game regulations, and that's insane because a lot of
Yeah.
the Midwestern, northeastern states, it really is like ruffed grouse, American woodcock, maybe some prairie grouse, like sharp-tailed grouse, or some like very niche populations of prairie chickens and stuff like that. But Colorado has everything from chukar to quail, to dusky grouse to sage grouse and pretty much everything in between, even some like pretty secluded like mountain sharp-tailed grouse populations. And here in Gunnison, I'm most familiar with the dusky grouse. It's pretty much the only wild upland bird that lives in my neck of the woods besides the Gunnison sage grouse, which I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but it is a super endangered species. There used to be millions of them throughout, kind of like the Four Corners area. And
Mhm.
now it's estimated that that population size is below 1,000 birds. And so I don't ever expect to hunt them in my lifetime. It would be really great if they just don't go extinct in my lifetime.
Right.
But yeah, so those are kind of the two that I'm the most familiar with, just given my location, and where I live and where I spend most of my time in the hunting woods. But the dusky grouse populations are really robust out here. I think
Great.
most people, don't specifically target them. Instead, they're out there, archery elk hunting, mule deer hunting, something like that, and they happen to see a dusky grouse, and they either, put on a judo tip for taking small game, or they're carrying like a 22 revolver in their holster as their little sidearm or something, and they'll see a grouse and shoot it like that. But very little like targeted dusky grouse hunting efforts happen here, which I think keeps the population really high and really healthy. And it also means there's tons of opportunities for hunting them from everywhere from, 8,500 feet up to 10,000. And above that, you start getting into some ptarmigan stuff, which I haven't really dabbled in quite yet. I am very intrigued by it. I have seen them out here in the landscape, like by Taylor Park, and up in like way in the northern reaches of the West Elk Wilderness. But yeah, they're a little bit trickier to get to than the Duskies.
Yeah, if you're going that high, but at least it's easier to pack out than an elk or a deer.
Yeah,
We are
totally.
climbing to those heights.
Yeah. But yeah, on the waterfowl front, so Western Colorado is split into two different regions. So there's the Western zone and the Eastern Western zone that both fall within the Pacific Flyway, which is west of the Continental Divide. And then east of the Continental Divide, you've got the Central Flyway. But I'm primarily hunting in that Eastern Western zone over here in the Pacific, just being in Gunnison County and all that kind of good stuff. And so our waterfowl season, we had an early goose season that I hunted for like one day. There were a ton of geese out here. I was the only other goose hunter I saw that day. I drive Highway 50 a lot, and there's just geese lined up, right on the edge of
Everywhere.
Blue Mesa, and no one's out there hunting them. So there's definitely some ample opportunities for early season goose hunting around here. And then our really long, we have a very extensive waterfowl season when it comes to Colorado. It opens on September 30th and it ends January 12th in 2024.
Oh, wow.
So really you can hunt waterfowl almost through the end of small game season, which is really cool. And what I find is the most fascinating, at least around here, is depending on like how soon winter comes, the waterfowl are moving around in accordance to like, both the water level of Blue Mesa and when the edges of the shallower parts of Blue Mesa are starting to freeze over. So now in the early season, the water level is actually pretty high, especially compared to last year. It was probably, shoot, maybe even 20% lower by this time last year. Like I'm hunting an area right now that didn't even have water in it at this time
Yeah.
last year. And so it's like a totally new spot for me just because the dam hasn't released that same amount of water yet. And it's just a giant mud pit out there. And so I'm expecting until either that water, gets shot through the dam and back into the Gunnison River, or it freezes over, then those birds move onto like the larger Blue Mesa area in like the shallower, kind of muddier, where there's just easy access to invertebrates and plant matter out there. And then once Blue Mesa freezes over, they'll be found in the rivers. And then once the river freezes over, you'll be looking at those little warm water springs that are coming up and feeding the river. And they'll pretty much be holed up in those locations. So it's fun. It's an ever-changing hunting environment.
That's interesting. The fact that they kind of go with the water flow, and like I didn't know that that's kind of how they migrate. And I know they do a big migration probably towards the
Yeah.
end of the season, but the fact that they're already doing it like the season itself is really interesting.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that too, it's like they're still migrating, towards the southern United States, towards Central America, all that type of stuff right now. In addition to like these local migrations that focus on different parts of even the same body of water, there's waves of new birds coming in, depending on what the weather in Canada is doing, what the weather in Montana is doing. And so it's kind of fun to have like Saskatchewan saved on my phone as a location that I'm checking the weather for. And I'm like, is it below freezing up there yet? Is their water going to be closed off? Did they just experience a giant snowstorm that pushed a bunch of birds out? Because then I usually just wait, 2 to 3 days, and those birds that were in Canada are now going to be in Colorado. And now I have a whole new population of birds that have probably never been hunted before, 15 minutes away from my house that I can go out and chase
It's
before
kind of
work.
like you hear about storm chasers for like skiing and things, but it's storm chasing on
Yeah,
the other end too for hunting. I love that.
totally.
And you mentioned we've discussed how the winters last year affected fishing, how it affected kind of big game. Obviously birds are able to kind of avoid some of that weather, but beyond kind of the higher water that you're seeing at like Blue Mesa, were there other things that kind of affected the population of birds or hunting this year from last year?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, birds are different than elk in that they can really easily just vacate an area. They're not going to get stuck, say in northwestern Colorado and then experience, feet upon feet of snow being dumped on top of them. Like they can just get up and fly away, as opposed to those elk herds, those pronghorn herds that are stuck there. And then you see some pretty high numbers of winter kill that have now, been interpreted into, our tag allocations for this year and stuff like that. So the thing that has had more of an effect on wild bird populations in the last year or two has been the avian flu.
Mhm.
Granted, it's still a serious issue in Colorado, especially in eastern Colorado. Western Colorado, it's not so bad just because it is more isolated from that central flyway. The
Okay.
central flyway definitely had a higher prevalence of the avian flu, in addition to the Atlantic flyway too, compared to the Pacific flyway. And so my local birds, were healthy. I didn't really see any sick or starving birds last year while I was out here hunting. Nothing like, finding washed up dead ducks on the shore, as, some other places out east have experienced, because I mean, that's pretty depressing. So I'm glad the prevalence hasn't been that high here, and hopefully won't get that here, just because at least, the Western Colorado is so isolated from other bird populations that may have a higher prevalence of disease. So I feel like they're pretty safe. But other than that, yeah, seeing pretty reliable bird numbers each year. nothing crazy. Been here 5 years now, and
Yeah.
even though I haven't been hunting ducks in those whole 5 years, I've definitely been out there looking at them and just seeing which species tend to come through. Because we get some really cool ones. Pacific flyway pintails. I've seen a cinnamon teal here multiple times, and those
What's
are just
that?
rare. Ooh, so
By
it's
the
a type
way.
of teal. Yeah, so it's in the same, like little family as blue-winged teal, green-winged teal that are definitely more common, especially during the early season. Those are some of the tiniest ducks that you can hunt, so they're really easy to see out there because they literally look like they're a quarter of the size of the mallard. And so
Yeah.
if you're out there looking at a group of mallards and you're like, well, what are those little teeny guys? Like those are probably the teal. But the cinnamon teal are a little bit larger, and they're named after their color. They're like a bright, shiny copper red. They're absolutely beautiful. Um, yeah, I'm almost hesitant to shoot one just because, if I saw one out here, that would be the third cinnamon teal I've ever seen near Gunnison. But like, it would also be kind of cool to have a full body mount because I'm a bird nerd and I want a collection of dead bird stuff in my house. Is just the way that I am. So I go
I
back
think
and forth
I
on
would
that type
too.
of stuff. But yeah, it's a cool bird for sure.
Awesome. And another thing, again, not to compare elk and birds, but they're kind of the two hunting zones that we handle. Another thing that's really affecting some of these migratory corridors, and maybe again it's a little different for birds, is kind of this upward mobility of development in the western
Mhm.
states. And I know, Gunnison, there's been a lot of kind of development over there. Have you seen this affect some of those populations? Are there any kind of like wetlands that are being affected or things like that to be concerned about?
That's a great question. And, loss of habitat is the number one reason why, for example, upland birds are one of the most at-risk game species in the United States. It's just we're developing everything all the time. And I'm pretty fortunate here in Gunnison that government lands surround on all sides of town. And so like while we have been developing and just increasing some stuff, like we have a new FedEx shipping facility that was definitely, you know, on what used to be an old hayfield, and I know that because I saw it, and like I've seen coyotes and foxes and birds and geese all hang out there, and now it's a FedEx facility, as well as some like affordable housing developments and things like that. But at least we're restricted by those government lands, so it can only reach out so far. I can't ever
Mhm.
really see Gunnison becoming, like the Fort Collins to Colorado Springs corridor, where it's just like a sheet of
Oh, I hate
development. Like, oh,
it.
everything. Every time I drive through it, I feel like it's gotten bigger, and it makes me really sad. But I know there's wildlife out there that are being displaced or just,
Struggling.
straight up dying because their food and water and shelter sources have been removed from that landscape. That is definitely a huge issue with birds, even though it's a pretty small effect here in Gunnison. That being said, it's still a huge deal for the Gunnison sage grouse, just because a lot of the like adjacent farmlands that are, right on Tamichi Creek, right by the Gunnison River, those are major water sources for, just upland bird species, and in my case, the Gunnison sage grouse. And it's tough when, that corridor gets filled in by buildings, parking lots, other development, stuff like that, as opposed to just them having a clear, safe route to travel to food and water sources and having a clear, safe route to go back to like their sheltering areas. But yeah.
Yeah, so connecting all those lands as much as we can. Um,
Mhm.
and, I appreciate you kinda going through what you're seeing up there in Gunnison. Do you expect a big difference in next season from what you've experienced this season, from a kind of a hunting perspective?
Yeah, I really don't think so. I mean, the effects out here are so small, and the places where I see the highest densities of, waterfowl, dusky grouse are probably 30 minutes away from like the center of town. And
Mhm.
so, a lot of those places that I'm hunting are BLM lands, Forest Service lands, the Currituck Canyon National Recreation Area. I don't really foresee those state or those federal agencies selling out to, development and stuff like that. And so I feel like we have a really, really good chance of maintaining long stretches of continuous habitat outside and around Gunnison, which I feel pretty fortunate about.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure. And another question, and we talked about this a little bit before, is kind of, these Colorado Western states, there's a big focus on management of big game, but a little less on birds. Can you kind of talk about this a little bit more and what you're seeing from even just kind of like a government influence too, of some of these things that are happening with what is it, like Colorado Parks and Wildlife and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And so as everyone listening to this is probably aware, people love to go elk and mule deer hunting in Colorado. Colorado Parks and Wildlife pays a ton of attention to the populations of these two animals, as well as other big game animals, moose, pronghorn. Those other species are coming to mind as well. And those non-resident tags are very pricey. And that is where Colorado Parks and Wildlife makes the vast majority of their dollars, is in those non-resident over-the-counter elk licenses that they can sell literally as many of them as they want, and increase their state budget. To granted, this money goes towards things like habitat management and restoration efforts and stuff like that, and so I get why they would price those hunts at higher prices, so then they can increase their annual expenditure funds and stuff like that. It does make it a little difficult though, just from like a monetary, like budget friendly perspective, for non-residents to come in and hunt those species. The small game hunts tend to be much more accessible. But then to kind of go back to answering your question, as a result, small game populations and management and season dates tend to be overlooked, not just in Colorado, but in pretty much every single state in the United States. This is something I've heard, from like AJ in New Hampshire. I think their ruffed grouse bag limit hasn't changed in something like over 50 years, even though
Wow.
some of his like grouse covers he hunted, in his childhood are now like towns. Like there's a mall there, like that habitat literally does not exist anymore. Clearly those birds do not exist anymore. It's crazy that, state agencies haven't taken this land loss into account when estimating small game populations for upland birds, as well as things like cottontails, squirrels, all of these species that, matter from an ecological perspective and have value, no matter how small or untrophy like they may be. But yeah, as a result, I mean, small game populations, both upland bird and waterfowl, tend to be pretty much the same every year. I haven't seen any, drastic bag limit reductions or anything like that here in Colorado during my time hunting. The only thing I can think of that's an exception is the very small huntable sage grouse populations that are in the far northeastern part of the state. Those are getting more and more limited every year, and I can kind of see the mountain sharp-tailed grouse populations going that route. I've heard through some other folks that the hunting for them was pretty tough this year. They're kind of more like north central, intermountain west type region, so north of Gunnison by a couple hours probably. But yeah, I think it would be great if small game managers, wildlife managers would pay more attention to these both resident and migratory bird species, and just taking their populations into account as development continues on.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. And that kind of is a great segue into kind of the next discussion, and something with your background and ecology and habitat and all that will be, I think you'll love this next part of the conversation. But, we looked at it from kind of a perspective of what kind of government agencies can help with, but then kind of there's this other part of what can private landowners do. A lot of private landowners have incredible habitat for upland birds and waterfowl, and maybe that's not necessarily their focus to hunt on their land, but it's as a part of owning land, they want to steward their land so that these habitats can continue. They can at least see the birds and the things that make ranches beautiful. So before we kind of go into what landowners can do, what is kind of the ideal habitat? And like we did in previous conversations, we'll look at upland bird first and then waterfowl.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so as far as upland bird habitat goes, I mean, native grasses and forbs are huge. Making sure you're not having just monocultures of, say, Kentucky bluegrass out there, reaching over every rolling pasture land, or, encompassing your entire lawn or something like that. Just planting, like, really trying very hard to plant and manage for native grasses and forbs can really increase the quality of the upland bird habitat on your ranch. It also increases the amount of pollinators. It also increases the amount of non-game birds, migratory songbirds, even things like hummingbirds, all that kind of good stuff. You'll see just more of them on your property, because they rely on that habitat too. They rely on, like, hummingbirds, for example, love
That's
columbine. You're all good. I have just like a giant patch of columbine in my yard, and like all summer long, it's full of hummingbird moths and actual hummingbirds and bumblebees and stuff like that. It's absolutely lovely. And I know, like, if I lived on a place with more property, I would make a concerted effort to, increase the type of habitat like that. Just because like I said, I'm a bird nerd. I want all of the hummingbirds. I want all of the migratory warblers, like on my stream's edge, and like some really good intact willow habitats and stuff like that. And in addition to, providing really good food and sheltering areas in those native grasslands, having good water sources. So there's a really cool project, or I guess like restoration method here in the Gunnison Valley for the Gunnison sage grouse. A lot of grazing has really like hardened, dried up, kind of muddified, as opposed to like, springified, all of these naturally occurring freshwater springs that are, all over the sage hills of the Gunnison landscape. And so there's a restoration group here that does a ton of work in creating what's called Z-dike structures and one rock dams. And what they're doing is basically digging up these old springs, putting a bunch of boulders like in the bottom of them, and then the mud, the ground isn't absorbing all the water. It actually has the opportunity to rise up to the surface and become a tiny pond. It may just be a few yards across or something like that, but they're seeing, increased native vegetation along the edges,
Wow.
increased amounts of insects, which is food for baby Gunnison sage grouse. They're seeing on trail cameras Gunnison sage grouse going up to these restored springs and drinking from them. So if you know of any springs on your property that you can make more accessible to birds, doing so would be highly recommended.
That's awesome. I love to hear that there's just those little things that you can do that impact
Mm-hmm.
even the type of bird, the Gunnison sage grouse, that's, almost extinct. So
Yeah.
there's things you could be doing.
Totally.
And then from a waterfowl perspective, I know it's kind of a different or totally different habitat. But what type of habitat are we looking at for waterfowl?
Yeah, so in comparison to the grasslands that you're kind of focusing on for upland bird habitat, for waterfowl, we're looking at wetland habitat. And so think of like the muddy slough that's like on the corner of your property. Maybe you have like kind of a swampy patch that usually holds like a foot of water. Maybe it's got some like really nice, like short, turfy grass on the edge of it that geese love to hang out at. That's kind of what I'm referring to when I'm talking about waterfowl habitat. Ducks and geese, they really love just shallow, kind of muddy, even ephemeral water sources that they can safely use during either the migration process or live on year round. And yeah, we're pretty much just looking for lots of insects again, especially for those dabbling ducks, plants that are really close to the surface of the water that they can easily reach just by dipping their head underwater. So that's where the water level and the types of plants growing in that water become really important. As well as just good loafing areas. So think about, just those shallow little muddy rises that are kind of right adjacent to those water sources. Maybe an old log that's, half sticking out that you always see ducks resting on. That's what I'm talking about when I'm referring to loafing areas. So just making sure they have these really good feeding, watering, almost stations, and then those safe places they can go shelter in when they're not feeding or just swimming around being ducks, are great to manage for too.
Awesome. And so beyond, is there anything, because I know, I'm sure, I don't know, but that like cattle, so if you have a combination of these habitats, if cattle get in the way or things like that, is it beneficial? Sometimes it's good to have cows kind of help with the soil and those kinds of things, but for some of these habitats, is it a little bit better to keep them separate or kind of connect
Yeah,
the two?
so not necessarily. I find that, ducks and geese really aren't picky when it comes to disturbance from other animals, as long as it's not a predatory animal.
Mhm.
They're pretty flexible. If you've ever tried to walk up to a goose and it just angrily honks at you, like that's probably what it's also doing to a cow. It's not gonna
Yeah.
like get up and fly away from your property forever. It's just gonna be annoyed at the
Be
cow.
annoyed.
But for upland birds, grazing can actually have really wonderful effects. So upland birds, in addition to liking native grasses and forbs, also like those plants to be a variety of different heights. So areas near, say, like like watering areas. You have a big watering trough where the grass always gets trampled down right around it. You might see sharp-tailed grouse using that as a lekking site during the springtime for their breeding practices.
Interesting.
They also like to feed on the insects that are more easily picked off of those short grasses as opposed to the really tall high grasses that are going up above their heads. But they like those tall grassy areas for protection from aerial predators. They also like them when it's really windy because birds rely a lot on their hearing and they can hear better when the wind isn't blowing through their ears in those areas that have a little bit more protection from the wind. So having cattle out there grazing can really diversify the different plant heights that are out there on your pastures, which birds really love.
Awesome. I had no idea. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
And I guess one of my kind of closing out questions would be if you could purchase an ideal ranch anywhere in Colorado, where would it
Mm.
be? And then what would be kind of the characteristics it would need to have in order to be kind of a Gabby certified property?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a great question. I've never really thought about that before.
I know
Oh,
it
I've
wasn't in the outline.
yeah.
I gotta wait
Well,
for it.
no, you're all good. So I'm biased. I love Gunnison. I would probably want to buy property here in Gunnison. What I would look for here is I like having the most variety in my, theoretical property that I possibly could. So I would probably be looking at something that includes maybe a foothill, like a sagebrush covered foothill that maybe edges up into like a little aspen forest or a spruce aspen forest or something like that. It'd be great if another corner of it was along a creek or a river or a stream and had, big cottonwoods shading it to keep the temperatures cool for trout, just so I can, that kind of dabble in having some healthy trout habitat on the property in addition to bird habitat too. I love horses. I would love to have a property that could maintain, quite a handful of horses, quite a few horses. So I would probably want something that's around 100 acres or something like that, just so I can
Perfect.
put them on different pastures and they can kind of rotationally graze them. And maybe I use one as a hay meadow or something like that. And so by doing so, I'm contributing to those various grass heights. Maybe there's a short pasture that they've been in for like a week or two or something like that, and it's pretty mowed down by this point, but I'm seeing, juncos and American robins out there feeding in the short grass because their food is readily available to them. And in the tall grass, I'm seeing things like song sparrows, Lincoln sparrows. Yeah, just managing for a diverse amount of habitats, which then contributes to having a diverse amount of wildlife all in one place, which is kind of just what I'm all about. So,
I love that.
yep.
Well, we'll try to find that for you one day, and we
Thank
can
you.
talk price point later.
Perfect. Yeah.
All good. And lastly, I know you do a lot of work with Uncharted Outdoorswomen, but I know you do a lot with obviously your job with Project Upland Magazine. So before we say goodbye to you, I'd love to know what we can all get, how we can all get more involved and educated on habitat, birds, hunting, all of those things that we discussed today.
Totally. So if you're interested in supporting a upland bird hunting, upland bird management, or even just, enthusiast publication, couldn't recommend subscribing to Project Upland Magazine enough. It is a beautiful coffee table quality publication, comes out quarterly. I edit all of the stories in there, and if you haven't found out by listening to this podcast, I have a pretty high standard when it comes to what I consider, quality writing or quality bird stories and all that kind of good stuff. And so you'll definitely enjoy the content that you will find in there. And then, if you're not interested in subscribing, just check out our website. We have beautiful bird photography on there, in addition to recipes, other types of stories, more informational based things, a lot of how-to information, how to butcher birds, how to, to get more specific, hunt pheasants on public land. As a first-time hunter, we have a lot of bird dog training resources, all that kind of good stuff. So if you're dabbling in the upland world at all, I would highly recommend giving Project Upland a Google. And then if you're a woman in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, or Oregon, checking out Uncharted Outdoorswomen for some educational outdoor events is a great idea. I work with just a wonderful slew of outdoorswomen that teach everything from, how to go upland bird hunting, how to go waterfowl hunting, to guided elk hunts, guided mule deer hunts, and pretty much everything in between, to like how to, put that tire back on your Jeep after it pops off on an off-roading adventure to shotgun shooting clinics. And yeah, there's definitely something for everyone. So
Awesome.
yep.
And I know said this to Erin too. I've only met 2 of you guys already, but I'm already sold and I need to sign up for some type of class, whether that be the mushroom foraging or the
Yeah.
how to learn how to get my tire back on my car, which
Yep.
we always need a like refresher on that. But
I do for sure.
yeah. Well, I just want to say again, I learned so much today. You know so much. I'm so honored that you were decided to come on the Land Bulletin with us today. And I'm excited to learn more about Project Upland Magazine, and I'll definitely subscribe. But thank you again, Gabby, for joining us today. And I hope to talk soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Haley. It's been my pleasure.
Awesome. See ya. And thanks everyone for joining us today. If you want to learn more and subscribe to Project Upland Magazine, please visit their website at www.projectupland.com. Also, if you're interested in the services provided by Gabby and those of Uncharted Outdoorswomen, feel free to contact her directly, Erin Kreider from our previous broadcast, through the Uncharted Outdoorswomen website at www.unchartedoutdoorswomen.com. And if you want to learn more about gaming, bird properties, ranch real estate, or other ranch marketing processes, please be sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website at www.mirranchgroup.com or give us a call at 303-623-4545. I didn't take a breath there. Thanks so much, guys. See you next time.